Good morning.
Morning, Milton. How are you?
Good, good. Yourself?
Good. You're looking good.
Great. Same guy to you guys. How you doing?
Good, good. Good to see your
Good
smiling
morning.
face. Hey,
Yeah.
June. How you been?
Good.
Hey, Charles. Well, good morning, everyone. What great weather
Good
we're having
morning.
out there, and we hope you've all had a chance to get out and enjoy it. Welcome to Trio Maryland's November Zoom meeting. We are very happy that you all could join us. I'm Marty Marin, and this is my wife, Michelle, and we manage Trio Maryland. And we'd like to welcome all our members and guests this morning, and thank you for attending. Today's topic is how to get what matters most to you from your health care. This information will help us achieve our health care targets. Excuse me. There will not be a December meeting, so enjoy the holiday season and stay safe out there. But now I'm going to give the meeting over to Michelle to introduce the speaker.
Good morning. We're very fortunate today to have our guest speaker, Dr. Melissa deCardi Hladek, who serves as principal faculty for the Hopkins Center on Equity and Aging, and core faculty for the Hopkins Center on Aging and Health. Dr. Hladek is a researcher clinician dedicated to studying how stress, coping mechanisms, and sociocultural factors affect aging, chronic illness, advanced kidney disease, and transplant outcomes. Her research aims to deepen the understanding of these influences and develop patient-centered programs that align with individual health goals. In addition to her research, Dr. Hladek maintains a clinical practice, primarily serving a Spanish-speaking community at the Esperanza Center in Baltimore, Maryland. She also teaches Doctor of Nursing Practice and PhD students. Dr. Hladek is also the president of the National Association of Hispanic Nurses, the DC Metro chapter, and an advisor for the Latinx Health Advocacy Group at the Johns Hopkins School of Nursing. There was really a whole lot more I could have said about Dr. Melissa Hladek, but in the trying to keep things a little shortened, I kind of cut it there a little bit. So we're doing her a disservice by not saying everything. But we're very fortunate to have Dr. Melissa Hladek address our Trio Maryland community. Hey, thank you for presenting to our group, and I now turn the program over to you.
Well, hi everybody. It's such a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the honor and just joy to be here. And I just thank Marty and Michelle, and also working with Infinite Legacy and just helping to develop some of our programs over the last many years now. So I'm excited to share a teeny bit about those too. So because I had so much time, I kind of expanded a little bit about what we'll talk about to be sort of under the premise of healthy aging. And I think that that suits very well sort of advocating for our own priorities, because it's all about aging healthy for us, right? Like what does that look like for each of us? So I'll go ahead and get started, but I'm so grateful to be here with you. I do a teeny bit of behavioral consulting for Fresenius, so I wanted to mention that, but it doesn't really influence this talk at all. I kind of talk about the same things with them that I talk about with you. But I wanted to start about the concept of healthy aging. You know, back a long time ago, we thought about health and healthy aging as either having a disease or don't have a disease. We had this real sort of black and white perspective on what it meant to age well. And we also thought as someone had more diseases, it was just aging. We just put it all as aging. Oh, well, that's just you're getting old. I think then we started to sort of get a little bit more sort of nuanced about it. We started to think this was MacArthur Foundation research that successful aging was really conceptualized to be more than just the absence of disease. It was more about like maintaining function, like how do I function well even if I do have a disease? The problem with that is that when you think about success in aging, you you can't really, that really doesn't capture it all either, right? Just functioning well, or, keeping your diseases under check. It still isn't as broad as we would like it to be. And people were not aging as successfully in that sort of way of thinking about it. So, there became this sort of more of a sense of, well, what else could we think about? Could we think about psychological and social dimensions of aging? Is successful aging just the absence of disease, or is it these other things? And so this particular definition, a state in which a person uses physical and social adaptive strategies to achieve a sense of well-being, high self-assessed quality of life, and a sense of personal fulfillment, even in the context of illness and disability. And I love this. And it's so centered around us, right? It's so centered around what matters to me. These are self-assessed things. And so I think we've sort of decided to sort of expand what successful aging even looks like. I asked my own dad, this is my dad, Pedro, about, what he thought, what it meant to age successfully for him. He's had both his hips replaced, both his knees replaced. He's had a laminectomy. He has a pacemaker. He has very significant heart disease. And he basically said it's participating in outdoor activities like walking to the town. He's not quite able to do that, but he doesn't live that far from the town center. And having a like-minded community, which I thought was so interesting as far as what it meant to successfully age. And in my case, able to play music. He plays guitar, and play with hobbies and following scientific discoveries with discussion. So this is what it meant for him to age. And how much of this has to do with his diseases, right? It's like very little of it. And so I think that as we all think about what does success mean for me, it doesn't have to be as sort of successful, healthy aging. I think it can be very broad. But what influences healthy aging really looks different for different people, and different levels of exposures to stressors. And these stressors, they can be psychological, they can be physical, political, societal. And there's a lot of differences in what aging can look like. And this is really what drew me to this research after working and teaching as a clinician for decades. This is why I went back to research later in my life, was just looking at the difference. If you see kind of right here, as people age, when we're young, there's all those markers. Okay, you're walking by 14 months. You're talking, at least saying mama, dada by 2 years old. Everybody, it doesn't matter what your socioeconomic status is or anything. But as you get older, what it looks like to age gets really broad. And that was very interesting to me. And so I think things that play into that are certainly genetics, but also things like the environment and social determinants and things like that as well. So ultimately, when we think about healthy aging, this is sort of what people want, high energy. They want to not be totally tired all the time. They want to feel like they can be independent and have good health and think well, have social contacts. And this is my family. This is my grandfather, Pedro, again, another Pedro, Nilda, my grandmother, my aunt, Adeline, who lives with me now. My mother and my father. This was before smartphones, when we were trying to get those cameras, when you could put them on the timer, and we kept messing it up and we couldn't get it done. So we're all like laughing hysterically because we couldn't. But what a great picture, right? And I'll tell you, there was some major health stuff going on, but I think this is a nice example of successful aging in the midst of so much, disease burden. And what older adults want to avoid, and this is my Aunt Ida, me long time ago. We don't want to have catastrophic outcomes, right? We don't want to have dependents not be able to walk and things like that. If we can, or if we can't walk, we want to have a good wheelchair that works really well, and ramps and things. So how do we get there? Like, what can we do to prepare ourselves to age successfully and have that be what really matters to us? Um, and I really love Aesop's fable. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Aesop's fable, The Oak and the Reed. I was first exposed to this in college orientation, and I think it might have been their way of sort of addressing our mental health. They had us repeat this mantra. It was like, I am a reed, trouble blows through me like the wind. And it was so corny. It was so corny to me at the time, but I've actually repeated it over and over at different points in my life. I am a reed, trouble blows through me like the wind. And sort of this idea of adaptation, right? That we need to adapt and sort of bend and bow and yield, sort of as a way of having resilience, right? And so, interesting times to think through that. But there's different ways to be resilient. And this is a great example. And I think for having a transplant is a great example of a major physical stressor, right? You have this major physical stressor that happens kind of right here at this time point. Can you see my little marker? Okay. You have this major stressor, and what happens after that? You can have a dip in your own performance and whatever that means, and then it goes back up. You can continue well. You can actually improve. There's post-stressor growth, post-traumatic growth. You can have just sort of a graceful deterioration, a little bit of deterioration.
I'm sorry, Melissa. I can't see your marker. I spoke too soon. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. Okay. Well, this is just sort of, can you see it now? No? Okay. Well, I'll just know the marker doesn't work right now. That's okay. These are just some examples. Here's another way of looking at it, to look at stressors, right? So everybody ages differently, partially because of genetics, but also partially because of stressors in one's life, like having a transplant and even just the journey post-transplant, especially with medications and things like that, and infection, things like that. And so you can see here different trajectories of how someone could have an accumulation of stress in their life over time. And you see, I put these little stars as stress exposures, and you could see the red line, this person one, they had a stress exposure right at birth, and they kind of started a little higher than everybody else. And then you see this, they have another stress exposure here. You can't see my thing. You can see, oh, okay, great. So they have another stress exposure at time point 2 here. Their cumulative stress burden kind of goes up, but then all of a sudden it starts to kind of level out, and they still have a fair amount of stress. Look at this. They had 6 major stress exposures, right? And yet their cumulative stress burden is not as high as you would think it would be as the person with only 3, half as many stress burdens, right? You see this other person, this person had less stress exposure, but perhaps however happened, they started with lower stress, but then they had this big stressor and it kind of put their stress burden up, and a couple other ones. And then all of a sudden their cumulative stress burden is way up here. As opposed to this person with 3 stressors, kind of not as much stress in their life, and they were sort of able to keep the grade of that accumulation of stress at a lower level. And everybody is a little bit different. And why is this? Why would this be? And I think part of it is our coping resources that we have around us. And I mean that very broadly, like the coping resources in our community, the coping resources in our church, the coping resources in ourselves, the coping resources in our family, what we were taught by our parents, how you cope when you have a stress. All those things factor into how we're able to sort of heal from a stressor when it happens, whether it's a physical one or a psychological one, and they can certainly be both. So that brings me to the topic of self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is sort of my life's work, and we'll talk about that in one way or another for the rest of the talk. Self-efficacy really is the belief that you can accomplish a specific task or behavior, even as things get hard. And you can sort of the idea that you can take control where I have control, right? Like we don't have control over everything, right? We can't, there's um, I loved the 12-step program, and there's only so much that we have, the serenity prayer, there's only so much that we have control over. But do I take control over the things that I can have control over? And that's really what self-efficacy is about. And I was very privileged to be able to hang out with Dr. Al Bandura for 2 days. He's the founder of this theory and did a lot for like the way we think about learning. He helped us move from sort of the way we do therapy. We used to do it psychoanalysis with Freud, and it wasn't very action oriented. And he helped move us in psychology to cognitive behavioral therapy, where you're like, well, what are we going to do about it? And more action based sort of ways of learning how to cope with things that have happened to us. So the ways you develop self-efficacy, right? So this is really exciting. One of the first ways is by mastery, right? As you do something, you feel like you can do it better, right? Like driving a car or anything. Another way is by other people. Like, okay, my sister started exercising, like maybe I can exercise too. Like maybe she did it, so maybe I can do it. Sort of seeing other people. Really important to have community around you that can be encouraging and is doing well. My doctor keeps telling me I can quit smoking. Like when you have someone in your that has your back, that's a coach that's telling you can do something. And it's not crazy. It's not this thing, oh, you can be an astronaut, and I'm 65. It's like, well, maybe that's not going to happen, but things that are realistic. And this one, this example, I need to think through this example, but kind of remember when we were all in COVID land and just going to the store felt scary. It was just like, oh my gosh, am I going to be sort of exposed to something your heart pounding? That's kind of an example of our own body giving us feedback about what we feel confident about in any one domain of life. So this is self-efficacy. The thing that I love about self-efficacy is that it can change at any time in your life. It's not a set thing. Some things about us, some things about our traits and personality are kind of a little bit more set, although that's not completely true. We can always be changing. Until the day we die, we can be changing and growing and getting better. But what I love about self-efficacy too is that you can get better at it. And that's super encouraging and exciting, especially as an aging researcher that's interested in stress and resilience and coping. So that's really exciting to me. And so, this is kind of technical, but self-efficacy is really nestled in a larger theory by the same psychologist, Dr. Albert Bandura, and it's called social cognitive theory. And it talks about how our environment and our behavior and our personal factors all interact with one another throughout our lives to create conditions that are amenable to behavior change, maintenance or not. So we can be sort of, as we're aware of that, then we can go, okay, well, what's working in my life? What's not working in my life in order for me to facilitate my own change that I need? And how do I get the help that I need or whatever it is? So all of my research kind of revolves around thinking through this picture. And these are my two interventions that are ongoing that Michelle and Marty and other people, Latrice Price from Infinite Legacy, and I think some other members of your community have also helped us sort of design both of these interventions that are up and running now. And I'll talk a teeny bit more, but they're all patient directed because they're all self-efficacy based. And so I think that's really, really important. So I did want to talk really quickly about self-efficacy too and how it interacts with our bodies, because I think sometimes we can just separate out psychological things from physical things, and they're not as separate as we want them to seem. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit, just briefly about that too. And so, whenever we approach any sort of thing in our lives, we decide if it's stressful or not. And it's going to be different for different people, right? I'm sure some of you have been like, that is not stressful to someone, especially younger, because the older you get, the less that things can sometimes be stressful. You know what I mean? So you will say, oh gosh, driving across the country is going to be stressful, or, planning this wedding is going to be stressful with my grandchild, or, this dealing with my 4-year-old grandchild is super stressful or not, right? Or actually it's not stressful. I love it. So you decide this is stressful. Then all the things going on in your life, sometimes how the whole, the straw that broke the camel's back sort of analogy, sometimes it's really not that stressor. It's everything else on top of that one thing. And you're just like, I'm done. So this is the idea. We always have to take the context into account, and that can be so many different things, right? And then there's the second part of stress. It's called the secondary stress appraisal, and it's about, can I handle it? So it's like, I'm going to go to this wedding. There's going to be all these people. Some of my family that I can't stand are going to be there, and I can handle it, right? Or whatever it is, whatever stressor, right, that you want to say. Or I have to go in for this testing. I hate getting these MRIs. It takes a half an hour in the tube, and I hate it, but I can do it. I can handle it, right? So we decide, here's the stressor, and then can I handle it? And that is self-efficacy. That is the self-efficacy piece. Can I handle whatever it is that's happening to me? And that also plays into our social network. Our social network, remember I told you how we build self-efficacy. Part of it is by watching other people. Part of it is by being encouraged by other people. So we are very much influenced by the people around us. And it becomes very important in helping us build our own self-efficacy in order to deal with our stress in our life. Now, this is the piece that I wanted to get at. So if there is a mismatch between what a person thinks or feels that they can handle and their original sort of that original threat assessment, then the body's stress response network kicks in to gear to help prepare for the threat. And this is helpful in short bursts. Stress is not necessarily a terrible thing if it's in short bursts that are manageable. It actually helps us build our own resilience and grit and things like that. But when stressors become chronic, then the stress network activation, it can lead to all sorts of exacerbations, early progression of chronic disease, other important markers of inflammation, and things like that can happen. And that's, I think, what we talk about when we say, stress can actually affect the body, and how we cope with that stress is really important. And so these are some of the physiologic systems that I won't get into, but all to say that a large part of our bodies, different parts of our body, are all in the stress network and can be activated when we have this mismatch. So I want to say a couple of things about that regarding older adults. This graph is really an interesting one to me. It shows this is about caregiver stress. How many people are caregivers in this room? Couple, maybe? Couple people, right? So caregiver stress, which is it's psychological overload on the bottom of this graph here. And then IL-6 is an inflammation hormone. We've all talked about, inflammation and anti-inflammatories and eating salmon and, having your blueberries and stuff, right? This is kind of what IL-6 is about. And these two lines here are for low and high self-efficacy. And I don't have here we go. So the one with the triangles is low self-efficacy. These are people with low self-efficacy. And then the people with this dotted line are the high self-efficacy. And what this is showing is that when self-efficacy was low, this line, and overload was high, then this was significantly related to higher inflammation. As opposed to when self-efficacy was high, even when the overload was high, their IL-6 was still low. And what the authors hypothesized with this study is that high self-efficacy might have been playing a proactive role against high IL-6 in the presence of increased stress. It acted as a buffer. It was part of that resilience, right? Just that whole system we just went through. And so how do we, I think, I could give you a bunch more data on self-efficacy in the body, but how do we improve self-efficacy and resilience in order to cope with stress, right? How can we continue that journey of improving that and in order to cope with our stress? And I think this really speaks to some more movements, larger movements within the country, and this what matters. And that's kind of getting to some of what we're talking about here today. And these are some of thinking through the goals of care, the goals of transplant, the goals of surgery. So the John A. Hartford Foundation, along with a bunch of other stakeholders, developed this sort of age-friendly health system certification where they look at these 4 M's. And you'll see on the very top the what matters M. Because, when you get into post-transplant, you're on a bunch of different medications, right? You have a couple other major diseases as well. You have guidelines sometimes that kind of interact with each other, right? And they're not necessarily working together as easily. How do you decide what's best? How do you decide what's right? And I think that's where our own values and goals can help direct decision making, right? And that's part of our own self-efficacy as people. We can help our providers, our doctors, our nephrologists, our hepatologists, and cardiologists and all the doctors kind of have a sense of what matters most to us in order to help guide decision making, especially when the guidance itself can sometimes be a slightly mismatched, like, they don't go together, So that's kind of what we're going to talk about now is how do you get what matters most from your healthcare? I just want to do a quick shout out to a colleague of mine, Dr. Mary Tinetti. I've adapted some of these other slides from her work. So let's just talk about Mr. Smith. And also, let me stop here for a second. Does anybody have any questions so far? We're kind of pivoting a little bit from stress, like understanding stress, how that affects us, how does healthy aging work? And now we're going to talk about one of the ways we can also kind of improve our own self-efficacy and advocate for ourselves with our healthcare providers. But let me go ahead and stop for a second and see if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, I have a question if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, one thought I was having, you were talking about communities, and I wondered if anywhere in this research they talk about the faith community or how faith can play a part in this model. Is there a place where that's something that seems to be important or addressed?
Absolutely. I think faith is incredibly important. I think that, when you think about this model, right? I think that the can I handle it self-efficacy piece can be partially buffered by thinking that you have sort of a benevolent God that can help you with the burden, carrying the burden. There's something very powerful about that. There's a lot of research. There's so much research that on another study that I'm the director of psychosocial variables. This was a study of physical resilience, kind of how someone does. This was actually post-surgery. Like the surgery was the stressor in this case. We had 2 questions on religion that I got in there because the evidence is so clear that having a faith community, having a faith, especially when you have the sense of a benevolent God. I think sometimes when you have this sort of like fiery God, that can sometimes not be as protective. But being able to say, I give this to you, you're going to help bear this burden, then it makes the handling it piece a little bit more easy. So no, I think the faith community is incredibly important. It also, think faith is good in two ways. One is it potentially gives you that buffer of handling the stressor. It also increases your social network. So you have other people that can also help you buffer the stress. And that's really, really important. So it actually has a double whammy benefit potentially if and so it's a really great question. Really, really great question.
And a great answer.
Any other questions? All right. Well, let's go back to where we were. So here we're going to meet Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith is 72. He has 3 kids, 5 grandkids, 1 wife. And he has 6 chronic diseases. He's post kidney transplant 8 years ago. He's doing well. He has this bad hip arthritis, which is kind of his biggest problem right now. He has diabetes, hypertension, a whole bunch of other things. He takes a lot of medications, 5 clinicians. He has a health visit every week. It's about half a day. So I don't know if anybody can relate with this, but Mr. Smith feels like he's very relatable to me. I mean, yeah, I'm seeing some hands up. Yeah. So, you know, from his clinician's perspective on him, his blood pressure and glucose are just they're running a little high, not crazy high, but a little high. EGFR is doing well. His kidneys seem to be working good right now. They're thinking about increasing his meds. The big thing is does he get his hip replaced? He's having this arthritis. It's bothersome. It's impeding his function. Does he do that or not? And, you know, his PCP is not convinced that he should get the hip replaced. Orthopedist wants to replace the hip. So there's some like, you know, and can anybody relate with this? Different specialists kind of wanting different things, right? Okay, right. So what do you do? What do you do in this situation? Like, how do you deal with this? So what does Mr. Smith want? Right. So he's not sure. What he knows is that he's always tired. He does not like that. And he is done with this half of a day a week sort of commitment to his healthcare. And he's back and forth about the surgery. He's just not sure what to do. And I think what can happen when you have multiple conditions, we also call this in the literature, you might see the word multimorbidity, where you have a bunch of medical problems. And if you just had one, the guidance is just like straightforward. But when you have 5 or 6, the guidance gets harder to interpret, right? So there's these uncertain benefits, right? Also, a lot of the time, some of the evidence we have is based on literature that was for younger people, right? It was maybe they didn't have anybody over 70 even in the study that created the guidelines, right? And, you know, there's a lot of different ways that there might be, if Mr. Smith is Black, then maybe there weren't as many sort of Black Americans included in the research that created the guidelines. So there's all sorts of ways that sometimes our guidelines can not necessarily totally represent us. The multimorbidity, people of color, and the other one that I was talking about, and the age. So all those 3 factors can sometimes play into this. So also sometimes things are just not what we want. They're burdensome to us. They're not, this isn't what I want to do. This isn't how I want to spend my time. And they may not they might not focus really on what matters most to the person. So what do we do in that situation? And I think that really the best thing is that we need to tell all of our clinicians what matters most to us. Easier said than done, but still very, very important. So we need to talk about what does matter most to us, right? It's a tough introspective question. I think part of that question though is, and what are you willing to do, right? Because there's different things based on what matters most, right? So if you want to improve function, right, which 42% of older adults surveyed in this particular survey, which I'm sorry, I left off this citation, they want to improve their function. Whereas there's another group, they want to live longer. This 27%. That's what they want to live longer. This other group, they want to relieve their symptoms, 32%. And sometimes it's hard to do all three at the same time, right? Because if you want to improve function, you may have to go to physical therapy multiple times a week, really work on improving that muscle mass, and it's hard work, and it actually exacerbates that knee pain and that hip pain, right? But you kind of have to work through it in order to, you know what I mean? Sometimes it's really hard to do all three of these at the same time. So the question is, what are you willing to do, right? So that's like a very valid question. I know for me, I'm like, I want to be healthy, but I don't want to exercise. I don't want to find a way I don't want to carve it out in my life, right? We all are kind of on this journey of like, what are we willing to do? And also what matters most to us, and how do we reconcile that? So I think this is the answer. And I think what patient priorities care does, which is sort of this sort of paradigm shift that I'm very involved in training clinicians. And I've done a couple talks now for patient groups too, but we want to train clinicians to ask their patients what they want. It can be jarring for a patient. I've had patients go like, wait, we were just talking about my diabetes. Now you want to know like my values in my whole life? Like, how does that relate to my diabetes? It's like, actually, it really does relate to your diabetes. But it moves decision-making from, well, you need to increase this, glucophage or whatever, metformin or whatever, which you wouldn't take necessarily, but for this, right? It moves it to, I suggest we try this treatment, knowing your conditions, your overall health, and your goals and preferences. So this is a very different approach. It's taking you into account with the provider to make decisions that align with your values and goals, especially in the face of having many different diseases where you could go different routes. So one of the first steps is kind of understanding yourself, looking deeply inside yourself to see what matters most to you. What are my values? What are my goals? And then that then goes into options. What are the options that could meet those goals and kind of create better health? And then do some testing, like a start, stop. Let's try it out. Let's see if it works. So this is kind of what we're talking about. So the first step in that is really exploring what matters to you, your values. And so these are, this first one is about connecting. This is a huge area that older adults and all people, myself included, I love this. This may include, your spiritual community, like Mr. Cranford was talking about, going to church, mosque, temple. It may include, other things. Enjoying life really is about sort of recreation, hobbies. I once had a participant tell me that the thing he wanted to do most was help his grandson become a world-class archer. I think Michelle was there during that. And it was so fun. And it's just like, what a cool goal in life. This other one, managing health, managing symptoms, quality of life. Patients can also, can often vary in terms of how they balance improving quality of life and extending life, right? And which symptoms they want to manage. And this fourth domain is really about functioning. And this is often an important area for patients with multiple chronic conditions and older adults. It's really about being independent. How do I stay independent in my own home as long as possible? And then just kind of maintain my own sense of autonomy. And so here's just another way to think about that, what matters most to you. And so what is the one thing that is most important to you? So if you think about your life and what your values are, what things matter most to you, it's good to start thinking through, like, what are my values? Like, what matters most to me? And so we can all kind of reflect on that. And then as we think about our values, the things that matter most to us, then we can start saying, well, how do I get there? What are the health goals that could help me achieve the things that matter most to me? And so what we talk about SMART goals. We talk about goals within health that where it's specific, it reflects your goals, and it's also actionable, meaning you can do it. It's something that's reliable, it's realistic, it's something that's possible. And so let's just do a little, we can do a little exercise about goals and values. So sometimes we can get these all mismatched, which is totally possible, right? So values are kind of the reason I like to make this distinction is because as we age and as we get older, our goals might change, our SMART goals might change, but our values tend to stay the same. So sometimes it's like someone might say, I want to run a marathon. That's my goal. That's my goal. And I'm going to achieve it this way. I'm going to break it down. I'm going to do it. And then as someone gets older, they replace their hip, they replace their knee, and really running a marathon is no longer possible. But the value is to be independent, to be in nature, and to push myself physically. Maybe those are the values behind that goal. Can you still have those values and just have a different goal that meets those values? That's why it can be important to really make the distinction, because sometimes we can get really disappointed when we can't do the thing we used to be able to do. But what we can always go back to our values and say, actually, what really matters to me? And then how do I maybe find a new goal that's achievable and realistic given where I'm at today? So, I had a guy say, he's like, I want a beach house. It was like, I love that. That's not really a value, but if we take that, right, he was trying to trick me. This was another person. He's like, I want a beach house. What are you going to say about that? And I was like, well, what is the value behind that? Like, what's the value behind wanting a beach house? The value is to be in nature. But we talked about it. The value was to be in nature. The value was to have like a soundscape, like listen to the ocean. The value was to sort of have the sun, kind of just to sort of be able to detach from like electronics and stuff. So we thought, well, how can we achieve that? We can't get you a beach house. I don't make that kind of money. But what we can do is we can say, can you get a big picture of the ocean? Can you play a soundscape of the ocean on your computer? Can you get one of those smart lights that kind of gives you the light in the winter here in Maryland? So are there other ways that we can sort of create, that we can get you to that thing that you value? Can you go outside whenever the weather permits? So those are some of the differences. But here we go. Let's just go ahead and see we can decide what each of these is. Is it a value? Is it a goal? And then remember, a SMART goal is where you can like kind of measure it, as opposed to a goal that's a little bit harder to say. Yes, Marianne, this is inspiring me to create a vision board of what I want my life post-transplant. I love that. I love that. Absolutely. Vision boards are great. Actually, we'll get to that. I think, well, no, not in this, in Capable Transplant, which is Michelle and Marty both helped influence that. We do give people goals boards and for them to create like a vision board for themselves, because it's so powerful, right? It's so powerful to think about, what we want and what our goals are. Okay, I want to spend more time outside when the weather is nice. Would that be a value, a goal, or a SMART goal?
A goal?
Yes, I agree. Do other people agree? Yeah. So goal, it's a great goal, but it's not as specific, but it's still a goal. Absolutely. I love spending time with my grandchildren. This one would be more of a value, because you can do this in different ways, like throughout your life, right? Even if you're post-transplant and you're like 2 weeks out and you are in pain and it's hard, you can still spend time with your grandchildren. The way you spend time might be different than if you were able to run around with them at the park, right? But you can still spend time with them. So this is more of a value of connecting with my grandchildren. I want to take care of my husband who has dementia. Yep, Michelle said it, goal. Yep, mouthed it. Michelle mouthed it. Goal. Yeah, absolutely. It's a goal. It's not super specific, but it's still definitely a goal that one can share, right? I want to work half a day at my office 3 times a week without interference from doctor's visits.
Smart goal.
That's a smart goal. Absolutely. And you can see there's even like a burden part of it. Like, I don't want this thing that is a burden to me, having to go to all these doctor's appointments, to get in the way of me achieving this goal. Absolutely. It is really important to me to continue to grow and learn. Yep. June said
Value.
it. Yep. June and Charles both said it. Yep. It's a value. Absolutely. And you can interpret that different ways throughout your life. Do ceramics once a week and walk half a mile with my husband each day.
Smart goal.
Yep, smart goal. Absolutely. So you see the difference, right? You see how, one of them you can actually really measure if it's happening. One is like a little harder to measure, right? But they're going to change, right? The smart goals are going to change. But that's why you kind of reassess them. They continue. That change is good. There's nothing wrong with change, right? It's the only constant in life: change and taxes and death. Right? Those are the three things. Okay. So here's another exercise I like to do is, here's the goal, and we'll just talk about if it's specific or realistic. So I want to be healthier. Do we think that that's specific? It's not like it's a goal. It's more of a value, right? I want to be healthy. It's not like super specific, but it is a value more. We want to get a little more specific. And actually, this is so hard. I want to be healthier too, but what does that mean for me? What it means for me is do not eat cookies. That's what it means for me. So it's like, if I push myself to get more specific, then I've introduced accountability into my own life, right? Starting this week, I'll watch my grandchildren after school 2 to 3 times per week. Is that pretty specific? That is pretty specific, right? I will start jogging a mile every day before breakfast. Pretty darn specific, right? Okay, actually, I think I got the automation mixed up. So let's go to realistic. Starting this week, I'll watch my grandchildren after school 2 to 3 times per week. That one, do we think that, we don't know who this is for, but let's say it's someone that is not impossible. They're able to help a little bit. We would then say that this is more of a realistic goal, right? I want to be healthy. That may not be specific, but everybody can improve their health. It doesn't matter what's going on. We can always try to be healthier, right? So that's also more realistic. Now, I will start jogging a mile every day before breakfast. I will start like I haven't been jogging. This is not super realistic, right? So sometimes we have to think about the things that matter most to us, our goals, and we need to break them up into more. What I do is, when I have a patient that wants to jog a mile before breakfast and they haven't even been jogging and barely walking, then we might take that same goal. I'm not going to say that that's a bad goal, but we're going to break it into smaller pieces, right? Like, how about if we aim to walk 10 minutes before breakfast or 15 minutes before breakfast, and then see how we go, right? So we can take the big goals in our lives and we can break them into pieces. And same thing with stressors. We can take the stressors in our lives and we can break them into smaller pieces that are more manageable for us. So I think when you think about healthcare preferences, right, what people want to do, when people want to be able to do, these are some of the things that people will want to do. They want to take their meds sometimes not. They'll go to the doctor, they'll do the tests, they'll do some of the self-management activities, and you'll see sometimes people are more or less likely or able to do that, or they have a lot of difficulty with it. And we as healthcare providers need to take this into account with people. Sometimes we just pile things on as healthcare providers. And we mean well, and we're just harming because it's like not possible for whatever reason. So examples of how I get blood work every month. It's not bad. Like I can do the once a month. My CPAP helps me feel more energy. Pepsid helps my heartburn. I like the Pepsid I like. I walk and do exercises that PT taught me every day, and that helps me. So same thing goes for barriers though. So barriers to goals, sometimes the medicines themselves, I mean, you know this, right? Sometimes the medicines that we need, we have to take, make us feel terrible, right? And that's this hard sort of reality. Transportation can be so hard. Sometimes it's like, oh, I just don't want to drive that much, or I can't drive, or I don't have a car. Just the financial costs of all these things can be so expensive. I mean, just post-transplant medications. I mean, you all know that much better than I do, just how expensive it can be. And just feeling overwhelmed by all of it can be really a big barrier to getting it done and just say, I just can't do it. So my medicine causes muscle pain, for example. It's hard to be active because of that. Or I get shaky and low blood sugar. I think I'm taking too much of something, but I don't really know what it is. Or they want me to do these finger sticks so often, and my fingers hurt, and I don't want to do that. And I don't want back surgery. These are just examples of care preferences on the barrier side or on the negative side. The way that I think about this, because the word barrier can be wonky, the way that I think about this is, I think let's dream a little bit. When I think about values and goals and care preferences and burdensome stuff, what I think about is what would a really great day look like for you? And then I think about like, who would you be with? Like, what would you be doing? And so you kind of dream a little and you think about that. Then from there, you can actually get to your goals and values. For me, it would be with my family, in nature, having like a picnic in the sun, just enjoying being outside and being with my family, right? And you can say, well, what are the values of that? Well, connection, function, enjoying life. And then what gets in the barrier question, like when you're thinking about like, what would be a good health goal, is to think through, well, what makes that day hard? What makes that day harder? And I think for me, it's work, just a lot of work and not planning well. For someone else, it might be, I can't do it after dialysis. Like I don't have any energy in the day after, even I'm like just recovering. All different reasons why that it would I can't walk very well. I can't get to the park. So those are good ways for you to be thinking about, what are my values? What are my goals? What matters to me? What are the barriers that get in the way of my good day? So let's get back to Mr. Smith. When we think about Mr. Smith and all his things going on, remember, he was the one that orthopedic wanted them to have a hip replacement. His PCP didn't. He didn't know what he thought. He's post-transplant, 8 years, pretty stable with that and those meds. He says, I want to be less tired so I can go to the club a few days a week. He goes to the senior center. And my medications make me too tired. He's like not happy with how many medicines he's taking. I can live with the hip pain. I don't want surgery. And so his health goal, the thing that matters most to him, the health goal after getting through all that, is that he wants to go to the club 3 times a week. We've decided that's specific enough. It's realistic, right? And there's all sorts of things to work on. Like, can I walk even with this hip pain? How do I deal with that hip pain while I'm trying to walk and get to the senior center? Do I have transportation? I don't want to actually drive anymore. I want them to pick me up. Whoops. And then I think what he would prefer happen, if there's a way to lower his medicines or to decrease some of his meds, he would really love that if that could work out. And he doesn't want to get the surgery. So these are the things that he wants to be able to communicate. So this is what you can do. You can kind of come up with what matters most to you. And what is that one thing that you really want to work on? I want to be able to go to the club 3 times a week. You can dissect that and say, okay, I need to work on walking better. I need to, I need to be able to do that. So maybe I will go to physical therapy because that's going to help me get to the goal that matters the most to me. And you can work with your provider. So then you take your goals and values to your doctor. You say, what can we do? And then the doctor and you can start thinking through the options, right? Because there's never one right way to get to be able to go to the club 3 times a week, right? There's a bunch of different ways to do that. You could learn to walk, get more walking. You could work on the transportation issue. You could work on not having as much fatigue. So you group activities together when you're the least tired so that you can get them all done so that you can go to the club. So there's all different ways to approach that, and you can brainstorm with your provider around that. And then you can try things and they may not work, and then you try something else, right? And that may or may not work, or it may work a little bit. Or you could do a trial of less medicine. I could say, look, this medicine makes me so tired. Is there any way we can like cut it down a little bit or not? And the provider might be like, oh, I'm not sure. This is why I don't want to, so you could work with them, but they're never going to know unless you bring your own values and goals to them in the first place. And so I realized I didn't put this in here, but there's a website that you can go to, and I'll put it here in the chat. It's called myhealthpriorities.org. And I can't believe I didn't put that in here. But myhealthpriorities.org is a website that you can actually run through all this stuff I was just talking about your own values and goals and what matters most to you and what are the potential barriers and of getting to what matters most to you. But this can be really powerful, even for our own motivation, right? If it's like, I don't want to go to physical therapy, but actually I realize that it gets me to what I want most, which is to go to the club 3 times a week. Then maybe all of a sudden physical therapy isn't as bad as it was, right? You see how it almost like changes it because it's a part of what matters most to me now. So what I'll say is that this sort of approach, it seems so natural, right? It seems like this is the way it should have always been done, right? We've done some testing if this sort of approach is useful, right? Where we really center the patient, we really listen, we really build trust. And so we had a whole group of providers with a bunch of different patients kind of try out this approach to patients. And really what we found was that there was more focus on the patient's own goals, a lot more, like huge increase. And then there were more medications stopped, and there were more procedures that were avoided. And there also was a decrease in treatment burden. So these are some of the potential things that happen. So I know we're kind of coming close to the end of the time. I wanted to share, I have 2 studies. These are both self-efficacy based. They're all patient, they're both patient, participant directed, meaning that your own values and goals sort of dictate how the intervention goes, which is very unique and different from a lot of the ways that we traditionally do research. One of them is for people that are currently on the kidney transplant wait list, which I know is not necessarily this group, but if you know anyone on the kidney transplant wait list, this is sort of who we're looking for, the people that are 50 and older, people that are inactive on the wait list or are active and have been inactive in the recent past, in the last 2 years. Also, we actually just got funding for 10 people that are active on the wait list. So even if someone's active, we actually want to test it out in that group too. So we have that. And then they just have to live kind of close to Baltimore because our team it's a big team. We have an occupational therapist, a nurse, and a handy worker. We do up to $1,000 in home repairs. We also give them an iPad and a lot of training on how to work in the digital space if that's one of their goals. Remember, this is all patient goals directed. If they don't want to learn about digital stuff, then that's not what we'll focus on. So this is capable transplant. And then VISTA stands for Values Informed Solution for Tech Adoption. We found that this is through our focus groups and our focus work and interviews, that if people can learn how to use sort of the internet and the digital space better, it can actually create more social things. What if someone's very limited, but they really miss their Bible study? To Charles's point, maybe they could find an online one. They could go to online services, or they can just be a part of a transplant group on Facebook. They could join a Zoom group like this, right? So we've realized that there's a lot of people that really don't have as much ability to use the internet, and so we actually developed this intervention, again, completely goals directed by the participant. So it's kind of co-developed with the interventionist and the participant. This one has a different criteria. It's 65 and older, willingness to learn or improve technology skills, and live in Baltimore or the surrounding counties. Again, the same sort of 40 minutes away from Baltimore. So if either of these are interesting to you, we will be giving people iPads with this one too. And then please feel free to reach out to either of these things. Well, here's part of my team. This isn't the whole team, but this is some of the wonderful people that I get to work with. Research is never done by one person. It's always done on the backs of other people. And also it's done with these wonderful teams. And I have the honor and privilege to work with these folks and on the shoulders of a lot of other people that have come before me and sort of prepared the way. And I always like to honor them as well. I'm lucky enough to have a lot of different funding. These are the two main fundings that I have right now. And with that, I'll just say thank you so much. I'm so grateful and honored to be here with you today.
Melissa, this has really been great. And we appreciate all this information. The website you gave us for My Health Priorities, when I send out the link to the recording of this presentation, I will put that in the email in case someone didn't jot it down. But both of Melissa's projects that she's been working on, that she spent a lot of time getting funding for, put a lot of effort into it, her and her staff, are awesome. The Vista Marty has put up on Facebook, and the Capable program are both wonderful. So if you have any ideas or think you know of someone that might be especially interested in the Vista program, please let us know. We can certainly get your information to Melissa. And you had people love your presentation. I can't understand why though, but no, I'm kidding. And you had Kathy tell you that what you just were talking about, she already put into action and spoke to her hepatologist. She puts this in the chat. She had a bout of rejection and she said she wanted to take less medications. And 6 months later, she had 7 less pills a day, etc. Feels great. And, now her doctor understood and was aligned with her on her goals and values, what she wanted to achieve. So open it up to questions. You guys have been a little quiet here, but everyone loved the presentation. You have a lot of kudos in the chat.
Anybody? Well, then, Melissa, I want to thank you, and I want to thank all of our guests and members today for attending. We love seeing your smiling faces. Check out our events page on our website for advance notices for our future meetings coming up. Check out our website, www.triomaryland.org. And all of our past meetings are posted to our YouTube channel for your convenience. We wish you a happy weekend and a very happy holidays.
You won't get to see these big faces in the window here again until next year. So have a great December.
And thanks again, Melissa. It was really a great presentation.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be with you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wonderful information.